Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of Environment Planning and Regulation for the 1st of May, and thank you all for your attendance. We have a full attendance, I believe, with no apologies notified, and acknowledge. Bill is not a member of this committee. He just comes out of interest, and I acknowledge council officers in the room, so thank you. There are no apologies. Is there any declaration of interest?
Yeah, I might have an interest in the building process coming up.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. So we move to page 6, which is the confirmation of the non-confidential minutes of the last meeting. Thank you, Councillor Stoltz. There's just an addition under the apologies. There were apologies from both Councillor Fenn and Councillor McLean, and you see there, it has been rectified. It's in the resolution, but not in the above it. So it's been moved. Councillor Stoltz, is there a seconder, please? Councillor Forrihinger, thank you. It's moved and seconded that the minutes be signed as a true and correct record of the last meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. Are there any matters arising? There would appear to be none. Thank you. So we move then to the action sheet. We do. We have a paper later in the agenda on the item on the first page. The other items are for your updates. 2 items completed, which will not appear in a month's time. So we move then to page 14, and that is the extension of seismic work timeframes for earthquake-prone buildings. And thank you, Mr. Petty. I would like to come forward, please. That's a really comprehensive paper and certainly clarifies the issues for us. Thank you very much. Yeah. Is there any items would you like to elaborate on anything, although yes, it's very comprehensive? And if there's anything extra you wish to say it by all means, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay.
So I've got some updates since this report was written. So for the first building that was a Lowe's Caterers building, the people who have brought that have looked at the storage option and decided that it's not viable. So they wish to demolish it as soon as possible. It does need a resource consent to demolish it, so that'll go through its process. But it's my understanding they wish to remove that building as soon as they can.
Sorry, I was just talking to Mr. Zaman. Can you just tell me again which building that one?
That was the first one on the list. Lowe's Caterers buildings. There's 3 buildings there. They're stacked buildings, one behind each other. Just as a note for the committee, the Mum Sushi building tenant removed the notice from their window. So we let them know that there was a $1,000 fine for taking a notice down, and that it should be back up immediately, and it went back up immediately. So Friends Indian Restaurant, John Wells, who used to work for Opus as a CPENG engineer, is doing the work on that, but hasn't yet worked out a full strengthening program for it, and is waiting for the owner to decide where he's going to go. Vitality Foods building has been put on the market, and the land agent rang me earlier this week and said that there has been some interest, but what would be our position on that if it was empty? And I think we'd recommend it would be the same as the Whitcoulls building. Right. The only other one is the J.S. Allen buildings. There's 3 of those buildings. 2 of them have been assessed as over 33%, so will come off the register. But the third one, 186 Grey Street, the agent for the owners has contacted me yesterday and said that they've got two options for that site. One's to demolish the building and make the site safe, and they'll be finished that by the 31st of December this year. Or if they took option 2 and decide to strengthen the building, that would be finished by the 14th of January 2020. So I'd like to amend that. Possibly, I think we could amend the recommendation there that says 31st of October 2019 to 14th of January 2020.
Right.
They've been very, very proactive, the owner of those buildings. And just the last little note is for the last 4 buildings that are all owned by the same owner. They are King's Theatre block, and I was speaking to the structure engineer from Wellington on a different matter early this week again, and he said that he would be up within the next 2 weeks and to do these buildings. So that assessment's very close.
He'll be able to do the assessment.
He'll
within
do the
next 2
assessment
weeks.
and then they'll decide what they're going to do with them. So I think that's just an update. I think the recommendation stays the same, that we keep it reasonably tight and so that we do keep on making progress with these buildings.
Well, it seems good progress has been made since you've having put together this paper. Councillor Cranster?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good progress there. With the on-the-market ones, how the timelines work? I mean, theoretically, someone could sit there for a couple of years and say, well, we tried to sell it and we couldn't, and then they want new timelines because they actually haven't done anything in the period that they've been trying to sell it.
Well, the most they could ever get, if this committee gave them the maximum time they could get, it would be 5 years from the March 2018 date. So the maximum extension they could get legally, which would give them the 15 years that's in the legislation now, will take them out to 2023.
And that's with any potential purchaser as well, at the same time.
Yeah,
exactly the same timeline.
Yeah. So if anyone asks me and they say the building's going to be empty, the verbal advice we're giving them is that they should not, they should do the strengthening before the new tenant goes in. Because then otherwise you've got the whole issue of a tenant having to vacate a premise halfway through and a new business, and that doesn't work very well.
Are there other, Councillor McLean?
Thank you, Lady Chair. Yeah, a question to Ian, and this is the interest I've got. I want to show you a photo of the Aladdin building there.
Yep.
And of course, the White House is right there over the alleyway. And I've just been given a report by a gentleman, the latest report from LDE, showing that it's rated as 11% and that nothing has to be done to that building for 2 years. So where's our limit, bottom limit, for an outfit that has people in it all the time?
We're locked into what the legislation says, so they have to have timeframes. The dangerous building part of the legislation is entirely separate from the earthquake-prone building part of the legislation. The dangerous building part of the legislation says that the building is dangerous in the normal course of events, excluding earthquakes. So it specifically excludes earthquakes. So if a building is not dangerous in gravity and wind loads and live loads, which is the people in it, then we can't declare it dangerous because it's only got 11%. So we're locked into what the legislation says and the timeframes that it has, unfortunately.
So just to further that, for clarity, that is not an earthquake-prone building. You're saying it's a dangerous building?
No, I'm saying we can't declare it as a dangerous building.
Yes.
But even if it's earthquake-prone and even if it's got a very low NBS rating, then we can't declare it a dangerous building because the legislation specifically says excluding earthquakes for the dangerous building part of the Building Act.
Thank you. Councillor Stoll?
I wanted to ask, are you also going to inspect buildings that are not in the CBD? And the reason I'm asking, you and I have had this discussion before, and we've discussed it again yesterday at Health Board. The Morris Adair building is not in the CBD, but it's currently vacant, and the hospital is just in the process to decide what to do with it. And we received a report yesterday that say it will, by legislation, all buildings need to be inspected by 2021, I think. And I was just wondering, because this report focused on all our earthquake-prone buildings in our CBD, I was just wondering the time frame or the work program for buildings that are not in our CBD.
So we do have to look at other buildings. We have looked at other buildings in the past, and you'll notice that the Waipu Bay Church is on this list, and there's other churches on the list as well, but in the next batch of buildings, we are required to look at them. We have got those 5 years to identify them, so we're getting these ones done first. But there's some buildings that we've only got 3 categories of buildings that we're allowed to look at. So we've got unreinforced masonry buildings, which are all brick buildings. We've got buildings built before 1935, 1 or 2 stories. And then we've got buildings built pre-76, 3 stories or more. So I guess the Morris Adair building would fall into the 3rd category. But if they're not in one of those categories, we're specifically precluded from looking at them.
Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, it's kind of an extension on that. The most lethal constructions in this area are very thin on visitation, but absolutely lethal, and that's around the Toko Wharf, those buildings, the old freezing works, and there are a lot of people that actually go in there. I was up there a month ago, and we went under it, and there's a lot of people went in there, and it's just loose bricks and high, and there's also a commercial use of one of those buildings as well. So where do they fit into the grand scheme of things? Because that is a lethal area as far as falling down.
Good question. So they're not on my, haven't been on my radar, but I'll put them on the list to look at before 2021, as Councillor Stoltz pointed out. And it may come to the point where they don't need to be strengthened, they can be exempted, but they'd have to have, the public would have to be excluded from entering or being in a facility of those.
Yeah, there's a kind of a stay out written on the wall, and that's it.
Yeah, it would have to be a bit more of a substantial barrier than that.
Thank you. Are there any further questions to Mr. Petty? And so there's actually only one. While you gave us a series of updates, there was one specifically that you wanted to change the time frame on, I think, and that was the
that was the 3rd J.S. Allen.
Correct.
J.S. Allen and Son building, 186 Grey Street.
To January 2020.
Yes. Yes, please.
Is there any last question with respect to the paper? If not, thank you for the updates. And clearly it has focused people's attention to the earthquake status of their building and encouraged, obviously, owners to start to do something about the required inspection. So with that one amendment, which we note, is someone prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor McLean. Is a seconder, please?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Cranston. The recommendations are on page 14 to confirm the recommendations and the timeframes extension to section 133AL of the Building Act notice to the individual buildings listed in the table in that report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. We're just about to move to the feral pigeon control paper, and I'm aware, Mr. Jackson, I apologise that I didn't see you in the room before I opened the meeting, at which point I would have probably broken all rules, but given you the opportunity to speak to the committee as if it were a deputation, because I did receive material from you yesterday and I wasn't in a position to be able to reply to it last night, but I'm happy to invite you to come forward if you wish to share that type of information with the committee. You can't be a part of the debate, but I'm aware of your interest and happy to allow you to speak to the committee. I just apologise that I didn't do it at the very beginning of the meeting. Would you like to come forward and speak to us? Thanks. Yes, feel free to sit there. Thank you.
I don't think your suggestions are going to go anywhere, because it is a major problem now in the town area in particular, as I pointed out to you last night. The suggestion would be a good backup once the major cuts are done, as a maintenance program, but as for actually addressing the big problem we have, I don't think it would do anything at all.
Have you got some, I appreciate what you wrote. Apologies for the technology system. I appreciate that you wrote that to me. I just want to ask, because obviously our council officers will give us their professional opinion in a moment, which will be consistent, I believe, with the paper. But you have done some research on the issue, I understand.
Initially, yeah, I did a lot, courtesy Mr. Google mostly. Yeah.
Right.
But
so generally, your point is that you don't.
My point is that when I first approached council, I was sent to Ag first, and eventually got onto someone there, which was not was a hard job to do, but I think it was a Mr. Howitz or something like that, and he does bird control at the airport. Now he uses a different poison than one you can buy in town, and that poison acts over about 3 days. The birds show no distress, no nothing. There's reports from other people, like some a professor in Canberra that recommends this also, this particular poison. Near the end of their life, he tells me they go away looking for water. And he says where they go, he has no idea, because he does it at the airport. They disappear. Right. To my mind, that would be a suitable poison to use in this district, in the central district here, where they won't be dropping out of the sky. But,
thank you very much. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share that information with the whole committee. Thank you. Does anyone any questions to Mr. Jackson? No, thanks very much.
Thank
Feel
you.
free to listen to the conversation. Thank you. So we have the paper on page 22 of our agenda. Mr. Karaitiana, do you want to come and speak to us about this, please? I'm sure we've all carefully read the paper, but if you want to expand on anything within it, thank you. We've all read the paper,
Right.
but I'm happy for you to reinforce anything more.
To the chair, to the councillors. From my view is that we wanted to look at how we can actually provide a opportunity to help at least resolve some of the problems we're having with our pigeons moving in and back and forth from town. We know, and I understand from our previous speaker, that the use of toxins is a questionable one to be used in town, but certainly if there's any opportunity to use a toxin, that should be one that he specifically mentioned, the opportunity to use that in addition to some of this initiative of rural culling of pigeons. We're quite happy to investigate that as well.
Thank you. Question first to, I thought Councillor Fenn was first that time. Oh, my apologies. Right, you can be second, Councillor Dunn. My goodness, keenness, Councillor Fenn. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Karaitiana. Just looking at the recommendations here, I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. And I initially agreed with that, but then sort of looking and hearing Mr. Jackson there, and it concerns me that we need to explore it more in regards to the DCR 1339 poison, because in my mind it's about doing not only having a recreational shooter out there, maintaining it, but it's like we've got a huge problem with them in the city, and if we look at the facts that are 5 mating pairs can breed up to 400 pigeons within 2 years, that's a real health risk. So it's about, I think we do need to look at culling as well and look more into I think it's poison that they're using at the airport. Because yeah, it is a real health issue and destruction that we actually have in the town as well. So I'm sort of open to two. The question I actually have then for you is, Mr. Jackson was saying that these die quietly will disappear. Do you know where they disappear to, or do they go into waterways? Because I understand they look for water. Do we know where they disappear to?
Well, I would suspect that the toxins Mr. Jackson mentioned is if they're going to water, probably the nearest waterways where they're going to be, their life lasts long, where they're going to fall is where it's close to the water supply nearest to them. Could be anywhere.
Yeah, okay, so that could also have issues, but definitely I think we need to look into it as well.
Councillor Dunn?
Yes, I noticed the recommendation talks about targeting their feeding grounds. Have we thought about their breeding grounds? So stopping the next couple of generations coming through as well?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I've looked at what the other regional councils are doing. Some of them have actually done some night culling around the specific Phoenix palms. So that is an option to be looking at where the breeding birds are. That could be part of in addition to the rural cull as well. So it's certainly something worth thinking about.
Thank you. Councillor Cranston?
Yeah, 13, as an example, over 441 pigeons were shot by the local shooter over the past 12 months. He obtained permission of the landowner to shoot the pigeons as they saw benefit to themselves, as well as providing recreational interest and a food source for the shooters. There's someone out there munching on 441 pigeons.
Amazing what you can do with
Thank you, Councillor
Yeah,
Cranston.
yeah, but that's how it reads.
No,
I know
it's
exactly
that's
what it's
it
meant to
says.
say.
Yes, that's what it says. Was there a question on this side of the room?
I was just thinking of it from a different perspective. I don't know what the lifespan of those palms are and when we are going to think to replace the treescape in the CBD. But when we do, we really need to think of trees or plants that are not a natural home for pigeons, because those palms are absolutely like the Bahamas for pigeons. They love. So when we do think about that in the future, let's take that into account as well. And then just supplementary to that, when I read this and we talked about poisons, we do need to be mindful that other birds are also poisoned. It's not just the pigeons that are poisoned. So it needs to be a real targeted approach if we do poison them. Stop it, Councillor Dunn.
Mr. Zeman would like to make a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I could just summarise a bit of the table and what staff have actually looked at. Following Mr. Jackson's petition a while ago, staff were asked to come back and look at a number of options in terms of best controlling the pigeon population. Under the Art Regional Pest Management Plan, it is actually for the landowner to do that. Staff have looked at all the alternatives, made an assessment, and based on actual poisoning that they have carried out in the past, which wasn't particularly popular. So they've looked at a number of agents and have suggested a path to trial some work while potentially looking at some other poison bait control mechanisms to do that. What's the standard and what is normally used through the industry is alpha chlorelose, which is quite specific and usually targeted away from at the sources of other birds as well, so that you don't have other birds, so hence potentially at feeding areas. So what we're not saying that we can actually control, totally eradicate pigeons. That's not the, that's pretty much unachievable in terms of where it's tried, but how do we control this? And so what staff have actually said is, this is what we intend to do, and based on the best advice of staff and people who actually do this, not to say that we won't look at some other alternatives. The toxin used, we'd have to investigate that because it's not well known in terms of what's normally used. So just to summarize, we're looking at, this is a recommended recommendation that we have, and we've put that option to committee to actually decide while looking at some of the other effects and how that might impact on other bird species as well. So if there's anything else we could add in terms of that, because experience in terms of using it, and it's used quite a lot in the kiwi fruit industry as well for those target species, and there are often complaints associated with those because the birds do fall in other areas, but this is probably the best path in terms of what we're trying to do at the moment.
Can I just make a comment, which I've not made already? I wonder whether we shouldn't be including in the recommendations to review the use of toxins to obtain an initial knockdown of the bird numbers. Because, and if you think about it, we certainly don't want to be poisoning other birds, but I have to say I've never seen a tui or a kiraroo in a city where we see sparrows and pigeons. And I don't think anyone would mind a few less sparrows, but it's the pigeons in the city that are causing the problem. And so while we can go out into the country and shoot them when they're eating the maize, which may be shortly, if they're not too late, or is all the maize harvested, or otherwise we'll still have this problem in a year's time. So I would suggest, and I'm happy to hear comment on it, that we add number 4 to review the use of toxins to obtain an initial knockdown in the bird numbers. Thank you, Councillor Fenn.
Thank you, I support that. With a specific time frame to get back to us, like I don't like poisons, I don't like killing other birds either, but what we're actually talking about is a potential health risk to our community, to our people. So yeah, I'd like a time frame put on that if we're looking at poisons and culling in the city, not just maintaining.
Well, we're saying, yes, item 3 says review annually the results, and item 2 actually says agree to use recreational shooters over a 5-year period. That's quite a long time, and in the meantime, the pigeons could have built up substantially. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, I'm sure you've looked at it, but I just did a quick Google how to trap a pigeon. It's got masses and masses of stuff with traps with masses of pigeons in them. Why can't we put them on the rooftops? They're like, well, and then dispose of them so that they're not disposed of on the side of a river, or they're not dying somewhere we don't want to die. You still have to dispose of them. But there's all these traps here. And
Mr. Salmon will comment on that. Yeah, I think he might have looked.
Thank you through, Madam Chair. Staff are happy to look at the options while going.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff are happy to look at other alternative options, as I said before, in terms of toxins and its use. Not just based on Google search and internet searches as well, but actually looking at how they're actually used and where the pest might actually die. Yep. So that's and we're happy to look at that, and because dead bodies in places where they can't actually be, extricated also create problems with disease as well in terms of venting situations. So we will look at those. So happy for us to actually look at that and actually research it and speak to the experts about it.
Right. And Councillor Forringer?
These are live traps for disposal elsewhere.
Will be a health and safety risk for council officers to climb on the roof to remove the traps. Councillor Forringer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of us investigating the use of poisons for that initial first knockdown. Yeah, absolutely. So if that's the motion that you're willing to move, I'm willing to second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor McLean?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're going to use a toxin, I read in there about some of the toxins, they flip-flop. We've got enough flip-flopping around town now, and I just hate to see young people coming into town and hundreds of these things flip-flopping around on the footpath or something. So I hope we wouldn't use a toxin such as.
I'm sure we won't. Look, I need to respond to that right now because I well remember, and I'm sure Councillor Cranston does, it was Councillor Hope who was hot on pigeons, and then it was in Councillor Hope's term on council that we had, again, a request from building owners to do something about it. And there were the odd flip-flops, but I don't think there were hundreds. And I'm sure councillors will do everything they can to council officers in whatever process they use to make sure we don't have hundreds of flip-flops. Back to Councillor Forringer.
Yes, and that's why I'm supportive of the initial kind of first goal and that being kind of a short time frame and all of those.
And we're only reviewing it as an opportunity. Are you happy to move the 4 recommendations, councillor Forridinger?
Yes,
And just to be clear again, the 4th note would be review the use of toxins to obtain an initial knockdown of pigeon bird numbers. And then you can, exactly as Mr. Zaman has said, come back to us. Is there a seconder? Yes. Councillor Fenn, thank you. Any last comment?
no flip-flop.
I'll ask Councillor, Mr. Zaman that. What will be your time frame to come back to us to report on flip-flopping? Seriously? 6 months? Inside 6 months. Thank you.
Mate,
Inside 6 months, Councillor.
Before you finish, I will say the building owners in the CBD do want rid of the pigeons. They do want rid of them.
They do. Thank you. Right. We have a mover and a seconder, and we don't need to note 6 months, but we've been given an undertaking. Council officers will come back to us in that time. I put it to the meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Karatiana and your team. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. So our next item is the work plan, I think. Yes, I'm between 2. I beg your pardon. No. On page 31 is the draft governance work plan for noting and for adoption. Thank you, Councillor Stoltz. Seconded, Councillor Dunn. Any questions? No. All those, moved Councillor Stoltz, seconded Councillor Dunn. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. We now move to the stock control bylaw, which is on page 34. That's fine, thank you. I don't know why I can't find the agenda. I've written on notes on the back of it. Right. So it's been moved, Councillor Dunn, I think, wasn't it? Yes, somebody moved over this side, and Councillor Stott said.
I will second it, but I just want to ask a question.
Of course, Councillor Stott.
So.
Does Mr. Gilmore want to? No? Ms. Noble
Yeah,
is
I
with
do
us.
have Mr. Gilmore here.
Right, thank
The
you.
question
No,
gets
just-
beyond my knowledge.
I only remember Councillor Seymour being on that panel with me. We did quite a bit of work to do this stock finding.
And we did it.
And we worked alongside NZTA.
Yes.
And to then suddenly say we have no jurisdiction, I can understand where they're coming from because we have to be signed off. But one thing that totally baffles me on page 37, number 12 says, develop a new bylaw and will be conducted in-house using information already held by the organisation. Why don't we just change the date on the bylaw we worked on so hard and not do more work around this? We've done a lot of work around it. Nothing's going to change, maybe a few words.
That is absolutely one option.
Yeah, well, that is what I would recommend, because when I read that, I thought, we do have the bylaw. Can we just tweak it a bit and not do massive work around it?
Tweaking,
No,
Councillor
change the
Stotts,
date.
because in actual fact, there was public participation process, there were submissions.
NZTA was
There were
actively
submissions
involved.
on it. NZTA's lawyer phoned in from Auckland. if
I
you
remember
recall,
that.
And maybe Councillor Forridinger, those who were on the hearings panel at the time. And clearly, none of them were aware of their own process. I think that's what it boils down to. And when the time came for it to be signed off by the legal department, somebody said, hang on a moment. That's
So
clearly what's
to
happened.
me, that makes perfect sense, you know.
And so it doesn't mean that any content of our bylaw needs to change. It surely
No,
must be.
that's absolutely what we can do and what one of the options we'll be coming back to you with. We haven't actually got the delegation in writing yet. It's been approved by the board, but we don't have the piece of signed paperwork yet.
No, I totally agree. with
Keep
Councillor
it,
Stoll.
keep it smart, keep it easy.
The other thing that wasn't clear to me from this
Make it
paper
happen.
is, are we implementing the bylaw on our own local roads? Because there were 2 sets of conditions for those of us who sat around the table. So is council administering the bylaw with respect to local roads?
Yes, we are. As I understand it, most of the activity, if you like, is on those state highways, particularly State Highway 35. we do have one of our animal control officers in the room who might be able to provide a more informed response. As I understand it also, that the majority of the way in which we deal with the complaints or any issues arising is through the Impounding Act, because that actually has some tougher powers in terms of enforcement, in that we can impound the animals if they're wandering, and then the fees associated with getting the animals back are higher than.
We're all familiar with that
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Yeah.
It was the issue of droving on the roads that was a very significant part of the discussion, and it was a significant part of the submissions that were made by federated farmers and other members of the community to that hearing process.
But just supplementary to what I said earlier, what you just want to reiterate when you said, you know, we work with NZTA, we had so much input that it feels to me the bylaw that we created then are more than sufficient. We did all the work around it. So I do hope when we get that paperwork that it would be minor tweaks that needs to be made, maybe the odd things. That need to
Yeah,
change.
it can absolutely
Can't change
be.
anything without a hearing.
I know,
So therefore, there shouldn't be any need for any change.
but there will be changes to dates and
A
to
date.
sign off the
Yeah,
delegations.
Yeah, and we do need to remake the bylaw, as I understand it, for it to have legal standing, unfortunately.
We will get legal advice about that.
We
because
have
this
had
council does seem to take
legal.
so long to do anything, and any opportunity to procrastinate seems to, fall our way. So let's hope that we can do as Councillor Stolz has suggested. The paper is for noting. It's been moved and seconded. Is there anything else anyone wishes to ask with respect to that?
No, thank you.
No, I'll put the paper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary carried. Thank you. We move then to page number 40 and the paper on water quality and quantity in the Waipu catchment. Thank you, Ms. Easton. Thank you.
Just while it's going up now, so just to introduce this report. So obviously we're just gearing up to start the work on preparing the Waipu catchment plan, and this state of the Waipu, if you like, water quality and quantity is really part of that. Sorry, and it's a snapshot of state and trends of the Waipu catchment.
Can we just make it clear from the beginning, or you can clarify for me if I'm wrong? It's a desktop analysis of the data that you had already?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thanks. So we haven't been out there doing anything new, but it's pulling all of the data that we had inside into one paper.
Yes, Madam Chair. And just in terms of what we do, we have a monthly state of the environment monitoring at a number of sites in the Waipu catchment and the rest of the district. And so this is an analysis of the what we're finding from the data that we've been collecting over the years. So that's the Waipu catchment. As you can see, it's actually a pretty big part of our district. It's the second largest catchment in the Gisborne district, and it extends, it's got a very wide kind of geographic range. It's starting up behind Tofuriparo Farms. Part of that falls into the Waipu catchment in the upper part, runs in behind Tukumaru Bay. The Ratahi Lagoon, which is at Te Puia Springs, is at the start of the catchment in that area. It encompasses a lot of the Rokuma Range outside of the divide, and then a big area of forestry in behind Te Puia Springs, Tukumaru Bay, winds down through flats around the lower part of the Tapuaroa Valley, which has got, you visited at the start of your term with those incredible erosion rates and those bridges that had to be moved up because of the erosion. So it's a really good catchment, and it ends up at the coast just past Tiki. So it's the second largest catchment in the region, obviously, very important, but also, I guess, compared to other parts of the region, relatively undeveloped. So the main things that are going on in that catchment are hill country farming and forestry.
And natural erosion.
And a lot of natural erosion. So this just gives you an idea of the subcatchments. It's such a big area. We have a number of monitoring sites across those different subcatchments, so we can have a better idea of the water quality picture. And it does really vary by those subcatchments. So in the detailed report, which I'm sure you've thoroughly enjoyed reading. It looks at the water quality data by sub-catchment, but I'll just summarise that for you today. So the purpose obviously is stock take, what's going on, are there any trends, looking at both water quality and quantity, and it's really about providing that base level of information for ourselves and our partners to develop that catchment plan. Also, pretty importantly, just quite useful as you do with any state of the environment exercise, a bit of a check, is there any issues that we actually need to do further investigation? And then also, we're putting out our state of the environment reports this year, and you'll be receiving some of those to your next committee meeting. So this will also be able to be used in our state of the environment report. So a bit of a multi-purpose piece of work. In terms of water quantity, as I said before, hill country farming and forestry, predominant land uses. So actually, there are only 2 consented water takes in the catchment. So water quantity is not really a big issue. There are just those 2 water permits. Most of the people who are using water are taking it under our permitted take rules. So that's a bit of stock water, domestic use. We have, therefore, a really large number of water resources that are available. So I mentioned before that there are cropping areas along many of the rivers. So there is actually a really great water resource there that could enable greater development of some of that very good land. The Mata River, that's probably the major tributary. It's got probably 500 litres a second of water available. Waipu, another 2,000. It's a huge river. Just to give you an idea of scale, our total allocation from the Waipawa River in summer is 2,000 litres a second, and so there's certainly more than that available in the Waipu. Shallow groundwater resources, much like the Poverty Bay Flats, there's a groundwater system underneath the Waipu River. It's shallow ground aquifers under Tiki Tiki and Takamore, potentially another 450 litres a second, and then we have a deep groundwater resource that, to be honest, we know very little about. So water quantity for the foreseeable future is probably not an issue in that catchment. Water quality, as Councillor Seymour mentioned before, erosion is the issue of this catchment, and the physical state of the water reflects that. It's got, the highest rates of erosion in New Zealand, and it's got very, very erosive rock types, obviously. So that means that we have very high levels of suspended sediment, like that poor sad Hungia River picture there. There's a tremendous amount of sediment goes down those rivers. But I guess just in terms of the health of the rivers, the majority of that is when it's really heavy rain. So rivers like the Mata, which I think it gets about 20 million cubic metres of sediment goes down it every year. I've seen it many times in summer when it's completely clear. So it is when it's heavy rain that we get all that sediment moved. A consequence of that and the geology of the catchment is that we have the rocks have got a lot of phosphorus in it. So we have in that catchment high pH, high phosphorus, and those are unusual things in water quality generally in rivers. So these rivers in the Waipu catchment and also in our Waipawa catchment, which has similar qualities, they're high stress environments for native fish. Often they'd be regarded, if a fish from perhaps Hawke's Bay came to swim in our rivers, they'd probably quite quickly go, don't like the pH, don't like the amount of, conductivity, that kind of thing. But our species have got a bit adapted to that because it's the natural situation. Lots of dissolved salts in there. So the good news, I guess, for those aquatic life is there's lots of oxygen around. They're fast-flowing rivers, a lot of them, and generally good health in that respect. Bacteria, that's really a big issue for this catchment because that's all about being able to swim, and we do monitor quite a number of sites across the catchment for summer bathing, and it is used a lot by the local people for swimming. So E. coli levels are below the national bottom lines in a number of rivers. In the main Waipu itself, Poroporo, the Hungia and the Upper Mata are all in the D band for swimming water quality. And based on the land use, we expect that unrestricted stock access is the likely cause of that. However, there are some sites that do have good swimming water quality, the Mangaporo River, and also, interestingly, the Ratahi Lagoon at the moment, but we have quite a concern that there's a trend of increasing E. coli in the Ratahi Lagoon So that's something, that is one of the things we think we need to look at a bit more in detail.
Would you say that is just because it stopped?
No.
The recent trend, the
Uh,
last comment you made, would you say that's in the Ratahi Lagoon has been?
We don't know, but at the moment, the Ratahi Lagoon does receive a wastewater discharge from the Tapuia Springs Hospital, and also the settlement of Tapuia Springs is all on septic tanks. So we would like to do, and probably would hope to next year, some fecal source tracking in Ratahi Lagoon to see if the problem is from stock or whether actually there's a human source of E. coli there. And obviously that makes quite a big difference to its safety in terms of swimming. But in actual fact, because of those wastewater discharges, local people don't swim in that lagoon. So while it might meet the bacterial standard, it doesn't meet the standard of people feeling comfortable to swim there.
Why is the wastewater going into Ratahi Lagoon?
So through you, Madam Chair, that's how the hospital was set up and the wastewater system was set up to do that. But it is certainly of concern to us, and we're looking at that from in terms of compliance. The resource consent has expired, so there are some issues there. Through you, Madam Chair, I would imagine, yes, 80s perhaps, or longer, yes. And that system that the hospital has, I think, does also treat wastewater from a number of other houses in the village as well. It is treated, but we are currently not consented. Nutrients, a bit of a more complicated picture, which again just links to the geology, the erosion. They're the drivers of water quality in that catchment. High phosphorus in the rocks, so high phosphorus in the water. But that is bound to the sediment, and one of what we look for when we're concerned about is water quality, good or bad, is what we call dissolved reactive phosphorus. So that's the stuff that's actually available to plants to photosynthesize and take up and for algae to bloom. Levels in the Waipu catchment everywhere are low, but I guess, and this is not just a trend we're seeing in the Waipu catchment, they are increasing. So we don't really know why, but phosphate levels generally low in our region, but they are just increasing gradually, and so that is something that we're watching. Nitrogen's present in a whole range of different forms based on the chemistry. Mostly, I guess the headline is it's in low levels. Again, it's not an issue in this catchment, except for ammonia. And the reason why we're concerned about ammonia is it's toxic to fish, so very low quantities it will kill fish. And it's, again, one of those contaminants that we watch quite carefully in this region because ammonia forms when the temperatures are high in the water. And so our summers are ideal conditions for high temperatures in water. So we have got a couple of places where we have elevated levels, Ahungia River, again, elevated levels and a trend of increase, and then Ratahi Lagoon. So Ratahi Lagoon really is going to be a focus of us in future investigations, what's going on there, because there's a number of things, the E. coli levels going up, the nutrient levels increasing. Aquatic ecosystems, they vary from being absolutely awesome in the headwater areas. So the Raikuma Ranges, these are our best streams. They're full of beautiful fish and aquatic life. And even those in the hill country are generally in very good health. So that's a really positive thing. And I guess that's what I said before about many of the aquatic life has adapted to the high sediment levels and the sort of unusual circumstances in those rivers. A lot of what they rely on is when those heavy rain events come through, they'll move into side streams, which are less impacted. And so that's why those side streams become really important. So probably the only area where we're seeing what is kind of the norm, I guess, lower quality aquatic ecosystems is towards the coast and in the lower areas. This map, which you cannot read, I can see. Basically, what it's showing is green up in the hill country, up in the forest, blue for much of the hill country areas, and we've just got a few yellows, and the yellow is what's fair on the evaluation methodology. And those yellows are really present in the rivers that have the absolute highest sediment loads, and particularly of that really fine sediment that comes from some of those rocks. So I guess just we'd say that it's not an unexpected picture from the analysis of the data, that the water quality is mainly impacted by erosion and a little bit by stock access. Also, not a lot of there in terms of trends. That's good. Water quality has been generally stable, so we're not seeing an active deterioration except in those two areas of concern, the Ahungia River and the Ratahi Lagoon. And so that's really where we'll focus a little bit of investigation effort next financial year to look at the cause of those water quality trends.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
That's very interesting. Other questions? I'll kick off. I know it's a cumulative, but I just was interested because the paper says collected data over a number of years. Can you tell us, is it 10, 20, or half of the sites are 10 years old and the other half are 25? Just generally.
So through you, Madam Chair, we've looked at the last 10 years of data.
Thank you. No, that's good. And you've mentioned several times diffuse discharges, just for the matter of clarity for everyone. What is a diffuse discharge, which is generally attributed to stock?
So diffuse discharges are ones where there's not a pipe, essentially, a point where the discharge is coming from. So if we take the urban area here, a lot of our water quality issues are because we've got pipes with contaminants going to streams. Diffuse discharges are from what just runs off the land.
Right, exactly. I just thought we ought to have everyone know that. Now, the other thing I'd like to have explained in words of one syllable, because I couldn't work this out for myself. Page 54, and we're talking about the percentage EPT taxa, and I can certainly understand counting how many mayfly, stonefly and caddisfly they are, then divide that number by the taxa richness. So where do you get the taxa richness number from, please?
Oh, through you, Madam Chair, I hope I can answer this question correctly, not being an aquatic ecosystem ecologist. I think the taxa richness is a score which is assigned to, if we talk about mayflies, for example, they're always present in really high quality streams. So they'll have a high score. And something like a worm, which will be present even in the most degraded stream, will have a low score. So I think that's what that is about. So
right, so it's something that's a given and determined scientifically, because it says, you know, they divide by that number and then multiply by 100. So I thought, well, where do we get these numbers from? So thank you for that. That's helpful. And what else? No, I think that's...
so through you, Madam Chair, sorry, I'm incorrect, and the director has... it's actually the number of taxa, is the taxa richness. So that's...
How many species?
How many species in that particular family of insects.
Ah, right. So if we're talking about, then let's be honest, because it is interesting, if we're going to understand the paper correctly. So if you talk about, and I've seen plenty of mayfly, that's what they are, that's one that's put around our little streams. So mayfly would have a particular taxa number, and stonefly would have a different one.
So they'll have two. So there's three different measures of, I guess, of aquatic ecosystem health that we've used here. We've looked at all of them. So some of them are really useful to tell you about nutrient impact. So that's the most commonly used one, which is called MCI, or Macroinvertebrate Community Index. But it's not so useful if your issue is actually sediment. So your MCI can be quite good, but it won't show that actually you've got a problem with sediment. And so we use percentage EPT taxa as a way of telling you whether or not there's sediment impacts. And so percentage EPT taxa, yes, the mayflies will be in a family, and there might be 200 different types of mayflies. So if you've got 50 of them present, that's a really good sign you've got very wide diversity. If you've got one of them present, then that means it's not rich in the taxa.
Thank you. I learned a lot when I was chairing the water plan, but we never even had that one, did we? Not that I recall. Thanks for that. Now, I have a similar concern to Councillor Stoltz with respect to the lagoon, and while I appreciate that we've got some unconsented discharge there, even when we know, and this is a generic type of question, we know we've got an unconsented discharge, but we know we've got the discharge. How often do we look at that, just in a general sense?
So in terms of how often do we look at that? We monitor Ratahi Lagoon monthly. It's one of our monitoring sites that we look at monthly. And I guess that's if you're doing trend analysis, you need to have quite frequent data to be able to usefully say something.
So it's not just happening with the ice.
No.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Stoltz is happy to move the paper. The recommendation is on page 35. No, sorry. Page 40. Note the contents of the report. And so move Councillor Stoltz. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Fenn. I'll put that to the meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary carried. Thank you very much. And we really look forward to the next report when you've done some more work on some of those areas that you say more work needs to be done on. Excellent. Thank you. I don't have any further items. Oh, Mr. Zaman has an announcement. That sounds quite significant.
No, it's really a plug, actually. Next week on the 8th, Wednesday the 8th, there's an oil spill response exercise with quite a few players, including the, which is going to be held at Waikanae Creek at the Cut. Ah, okay. But the date still state. So we will announce the actual venue in terms of the oil spill exercise, but we have the National On-Scene Commander and quite a few staff actually taking part. So just to put it out there on the 8th and Wednesday, if councillors have got time or want to actually come down and actually see or even...
Some councillors will be involved in a hearing that day.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So, well, yes, it's scheduled for 8 a.m. till 1 p.m. and more of an announcement to know that it's not an actual oil spill, it's an oil spill exercise as well that is actually occurring. It will be treated. Okay.
And I wanted to congratulate Miss Easton to your daughter, who I read it in the newspaper, and I meant to do that while you're still here. So please take our congratulations home to your daughter. Thank you. And there's no further business. I'll declare the meeting closed. And thank you very much for your attendance. Councillor Cranston, that he and I